most importantly, what a lot of companies don't think about when it comes to hiring is not just how important your employer brand is, but how does your product or consumer brand show up in the process? You never forget that your candidates either are or could be prospective customers, right? What happens when they walk away with a bad experience? There's such a reduced likelihood that they're either going to purchase or evangelize your product, right? So, having talent professionals and organizations just not worry so much about employer brand, but think about your consumer brand as well.
Welcome to Offer Accepted, the podcast that elevates your recruiting game. I'm your host, Shannon Ogborn. Join us for conversations with talent leaders, executives, and more to uncover the secrets to building and leading successful talent acquisition teams. Gain valuable insights and actionable advice from analyzing cutting-edge metrics to confidently claiming your seat at the table. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to another episode of Offer Accepted. I'm Shannon Ogborn, your host, and this episode is brought to you by Ashby, the all-in-one recruiting platform empowering ambitious teams from seed to IPO and beyond. I am so excited because we are here today with Lyndsey French. She has 16 years in the TA space, has all of her experience in SaaS and digital companies. She even did a short stint in marketing, but still with heavy ties to tech. And she really has lived and breathed the tech space for her entire career. She's been in a leadership role for the last 8 or 9 years and has really found a passion there. She's lived and worked in many different markets, so has seen a lot of how geography can impact the recruiting process. Overall, just really excited about the experience that she is going to bring to Offer Accepted today. So Lyndsey, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
I would love if you could give our listeners a little bit of background on yourself as it relates to your current role at 1Password.
So I joined 1Password about 3.5 years ago. I think I was employee like 320. We are now 1,200 strong, continuing, incredible growth year over year. So I am a director of talent acquisition. So I lead our different hiring pods, GTM, tech, business, leadership hiring, and I also lead talent programs and emerging talent. So really a good full kind of scope of everything that encompasses talent acquisition.
Good. I mean, I love that you're doing so much, and what cool growth to be a part of from 300 to 1,200. That must be such a cool experience. And obviously with that experience probably comes some recognition of areas of growth for the recruiting space and the TA space. Is there anything that sort of more immediately comes to mind when you think about areas for growth?
Yeah, I think, recruitment has really become something that is very intentional and really turned into a practice in the last, let's say decade or so. Talent really has a place, at the table now. We're a part of, strategic conversations. We're a part of capacity planning and really having conversations about how we can move away from this service desk mentality to really, being a partner to the business. I think it's even reflected more knowing the term talent acquisition is sort of replaced recruitment and recruiters in a lot of ways too. So I think as we start to build out more structured, formalized talent acquisition models and strategy, we start to look at the different components of what that looks like. And there's some stuff that really jumps out to me, but I think the importance of a solid, engaging candidate experience, hiring has really become an all hands on deck approach, and I think the evolution of how important the candidate experience is has been really interesting to see and, how critical it is to the hiring strategy.
And I love talking about candidate experience because one, not only is it important and it's we're all humans, right? And we're all humans going through these interview processes. And so that's an important factor to keep in mind. But with how accessible information is today, the liability of not having a good candidate experience, not even just holistically, but even kind of like not to scare people or intimidate people, but even one situation could really impact your brand like super significantly. I would love to hear a little bit more on that note. Like, why is candidate experience so important and why should organizations invest in it?
You hit the nail on the head. Like hiring or interviewing is such a vulnerable experience for people, right? And I think we have to constantly remind ourselves as TA professionals, but our hiring teams as well, about what that experience feels like when you're on the other side of it. Just approaching it with respect and kindness and care is just the right thing to do, right? So I think using that as your starting point is the basis of what the rest of the candidate experience is going to look like. So I'd say there's two big reasons I think we need to be really investing in shaping what this looks like. So you were saying earlier, like the rise of platforms and increase of platforms for candidates to share their experience, the message is louder than it has ever been. We see this all the time on places like LinkedIn, Glassdoor. Candidates are really willing and interesting to share not just negative experiences, but the positive ones too. So I think, not being afraid of the negative, but also recognizing the positive experience we can share as well. And I don't mean that to say that organizations are doing that simply because they don't want to look bad. I'm sure there's some organizations out there that's what it is to them. It's about brand protection, but I think there really is a movement that this needs to be important. So the tech industry has gone through such a lull and intense few years, and had become an employer's market. The industry is going to recover. It's going to become a candidate's market again. And it's crucial to think about how these experiences last with candidates and how they're going to share the message of what that looked like. And I think most importantly, what a lot of companies don't think about when it comes to hiring is not just how important your employer brand is, but how does your product or consumer brand show up in the process? You never forget that your candidates either are or could be prospective customers, right? What happens when they walk away with a bad experience? There's, such a reduced likelihood that they're either going to purchase or evangelize your product, right? So, having talent professionals and organizations just not worry so much about employer brand, but think about your consumer brand as well and how that's going to be impacted from negative candidate experiences.
100% agree on that last bit. And on the bit of like the candidate versus employer market, we had a webinar with someone named Dustin from Zello, and he said, if you're hiring, you're in a candidate market because there's still choice. And I think some of these things are inherently things that TA people know and have known, and now more people are getting on board. So I'm excited to see that. But when I had reached out to you about being on the podcast, I had come across a post of yours, and you had talked some about the philosophies and centering around sort of two major concepts of treating talent as future employees. So just kind of elongating that employee experience from the front, and treating talent as customers, which you've already talked a little bit about. Anything to add to that point?
I think when we talk about this concept of treating folks as customers, is just as important as thinking of them as future employees, right? People don't want to give their money to, or time or energy to, a company that gave them a poor candidate experience. Like that really lives with people, especially when you're going through something like interviewing, which I was saying earlier is a super vulnerable experience. So this kind of dawned on me years ago. I was working at a large retailer, I was working at their e-commerce arm. And it sort of hit me after we'd had, someone come back and share the experience they'd had. They didn't really have a great experience with the hiring managers and some folks in the process. And thinking of that person's poor experience and knowing that at any moment they could walk out their front door and walk by one of the company's stores or, other places where they could encounter it if they came across one of the e-commerce sites, knowing that person could intentionally turn it away or just even have this negative or visceral reaction to that because of what they had or the experience that they had. So thinking about how they're going to feel walking away from that's now how they perceive the brand, right? So I think when we're talking about, this concept, it's important to understand that just because you're in talent or you're on the hiring team, you're always a product ambassador or a company ambassador, and you need to be mindful of that at every angle.
I know that there are some things that 1Password does to really enhance candidate experience, particularly around trainings. I know when people hear trainings, people kind of like, like tense up, like, oh God, another training. But I would love to hear how you all have implemented this, like what it's done. So we'll start with how are you utilizing courses to get buy-in from the organization to have a superior candidate experience?
About 2 years ago, we started to really think about how do we evolve our process, to elevate what we're doing. And also, your business is constantly evolving. So the way you hire needs to be constantly evolving. So we started to think about what it would look like to get our hiring teams to a place that we felt that they were confident, they were well equipped to engage with candidates and to provide a really good experience. So we started to look at how we could develop training courses that were, engaging, providing a mix of content, whether it was around diversity training, how do we ask questions? How do we prepare for interviews? So we ended up utilizing an online platform that we have called 1Password University that we're using both internally and externally with our customers. And we developed these courses, two different courses for anyone. The first one's anyone that interviews at 1Password. And then there's a second course that's much more in-depth courses for hiring managers specifically that goes into kind of more considerations that you would be considering at that level as the final, decision maker. We feel really strongly about it. We also at this point know we did this 2 years ago. We're looking at what is the evolution of that. We feel so strongly about it that we want to make sure that that's evolving as much as we can over the next couple of years.
Yes, I love that. I'm curious, how did people react internally, interviewers and hiring managers, to these trainings? Because again, I think people become allergic to trainings, one, because a lot of trainings just like simply aren't good or valuable, or that's the perception.
I mean, it's been a largely positive, reaction to it. I think there's a lot of folks recognize that we are bringing in tons of people every year, and we're bringing in people who are also new managers that may have not had any formalized experience when it comes to interviewing. So there was some comfort from a lot of those folks who were like, oh, wow, okay, I can get, up to speed on how I should be doing this, best practices. And it's funny, there's also folks who are like, I know how to interview. I've been doing this for so long. And then they took the course and had some great feedback about things that have kind of changed and different ways to approach things. So it's never been something where we've received this like groan and grunt feedback that they have to do it. It's something that we tailored to be engaging and make sure that there was going to be some great takeaways for folks. So I'm really happy with the reception that it's had.
That's awesome. I mean, the reality is, even if you've been a hiring manager a million times, things evolve and things change. The market changes. How we evaluate people for best outcomes changes. And so you could be a really seasoned hiring manager, but that doesn't mean that this training wouldn't be helpful for you to just sort of get the perspective, especially integrating the culture of how the company thinks about hiring and interviewing. So yeah, all good stuff. Well, I would love to hear just kind of more about the process you all went through to build these and sort of considerations that people should think about if someone's listening and is like, you know what, we're really falling short on training our hiring managers and interviewers. What would your advice be to them, and how could they kind of get started?
So I think the first thing, people need to consider is why you're doing it, right? And it's something that needs to be socialized. We made sure that we were socializing with leadership, and they understood, that we were going to be pulling different resources from across the company to focus on this and kind of bring them along the journey of why we felt this was so important. I think the next big consideration was knowing that this is not going to happen overnight. When we had first started to look at what this was going to look like and how we were going to develop it, I think we underestimated grossly how much time and energy it was going to take to do this. I think we thought, well, we can pull this off in like 2 or 3 months. And I think it was 10 months before it fully went into production. So it's not something that is going to happen overnight, and setting that expectation and knowing that going slow is the right thing to do because you're going to make sure you kind of cover your bases. So getting the buy-in and support was certainly, crucial. We tapped a number of different groups across the company. We went through focus groups and got feedback on where the pain points and the challenges were for different teams, maybe some areas that they felt they had gaps in when it comes to their skill set from hiring, but also how we hire. Where were the gaps in how we hire? And this also kind of spun off some other projects we started to think about as we were going through this research phase. So after it was done and completed and launched, we made it so you have to take this course to hire 1Password. So you're like 1Password certified from a hiring perspective. We go through regular audits, or it's actually newly integrated into the onboarding for managers as they come into 1Password. So it's a part of what you have to do now right from the beginning. And then, there's always going to be some that kind of slip through. We hire fast. So we do, like I was saying, regular audits to make sure we're up to speed. We really doubled down at the end of last year and we had 96% completion rate. I don't know that I've ever been anywhere that has trading that's a 96% completion rate. So we were super appreciative of everyone investing time in that. And I think one thing that really, really helped us drive this is we have such an incredible chief people officer. She really saw the value of this and, she was supportive that everybody, regardless of level at 1Password, needed to take this course. We loved her feedback on it of how someone at any level could learn something from this. And it's always going to bring something new to the table. So she really helped us drive the message right from the top down that this was, critical to our success, to how we hire, and really making sure that not only are we evaluating, people fairly, but we're making this a great candidate experience.
For sure. That is such a balance between, yes, we need to get the information that we need as an organization to make a good hiring decision, but at the same time, the candidate should have a delightful experience in the process of doing that. So all of the alignment, super important. I'm curious was there anything when you were doing discovery and trying to think like, okay, what content do we need to put in here? Was there anything surprising that you heard where it's like, oh, I wouldn't have thought that this was of interest to people?
Yeah, I think the pieces that really, jumped out for us was the folks that were really advocating for building content from a diversity perspective and the appetite for that and the buy-in and support that we had, that folks were like, hey, I don't necessarily know how to ask questions properly, what kind of questions to ask. I want to make sure that I'm being fair and equitable in my process. So we had a diversity component that was built into the course specifically to make sure that we were giving folks the opportunity to learn more, learn best practices, how to approach questions. So I was really, really happy to see the support that came from that. And, some of the newer managers, it was really interesting to see the vulnerability that they had. They're like, I don't know how to ask questions properly. I don't know even what signals I'm supposed to be taking from a question. So there was this great, response to, hey, teach me, let's do this right. Let's get, everyone on board now. So I think those were kind of the big takeaways for me.
That's so awesome that everyone was so receptive to the feedback. I know it's easy for people to kind of get stuck in their ways of how they've always done things or questions that they like to ask. Did it change your process at all? Or did you have any realizations of like, okay, we actually need more structured interview questions or anything that stuck out in terms of there actually are things we could do better and taking action on those just kind of as a result?
Yeah, so there was a number of things I think that we learned quickly coming out of it. And I think, the big takeaway for me is really how formalized interview processes need to be, right? So I feel like we're in a good place, but I still feel like we're constantly learning about what a formal, proper interview process looks like and looking at all the different angles, like candidate experience side, but also the hiring team side. Like, how are we making sure that they're engaged, that they're enjoying the process, and that there is sort of continual opportunities for them to learn as they go. Also looking at, different perspectives, from folks across the business that they'll be interacting with. And one thing that was interesting is we really tried to shift folks away from using this question as like, let's talk about culture fit. Like, don't talk about culture fit, talk about culture add, right? That's what you want to get to, is a place that you're looking at a candidate and understanding what they're going to bring to you, and not that they're going to come in and need to fit your mold as a business. And, I think 1Password's done a great job of really recognizing how important that is when we're bringing people in. And I don't see that question. I rarely ever hear it used even in discussion. So I think we're in a unique place where we don't seem to be following that kind of like age old part of recruitment where we're always looking at culture fit.
I could go on for days about culture add versus culture fit. It's such an important, but it seems small, that word, right? That concept difference. Oh, culture add versus culture fit. What's really the difference? It's a huge difference, especially to the organization. You need to fill gaps instead of adding more of the same. And that's what culture adverse culture fit does. So I love that you all are focusing on that. Again, I could go on that for days, but I'll take a step back, and you all had really impressive results from this. So I would love for people to hear about the results, because I do think that is really encouraging for people to get started on something. So can you walk me through some of the results, maybe expected, unexpected, but would just love to hear overall about what you all saw come from this?
Like, I'm still trying to think of like, hey, where did we have a takeaway that wasn't inspiring? Like it was really incredible to see the results from it. So our candidate experience scores are like between 88 and 90% of, like a strong experience overall. We break down our questions to talk specifically about communications and hiring teams specifically. So we've got a really good view of the different components of how the process resonated with people. There are certainly times where we see dips, but the positive thing is that we can action them really quickly. We've got tons of resources and materials. We've also got a really well-equipped team that can have real transparent conversations with hiring teams about where we need to fix something. And we get an email every week where we look at our survey results from the week before, and we action it immediately. We get on the phone with managers and we share feedback, but it's also about sharing the good feedback and the positive experiences. So that's a takeaway for the hiring teams, that they know that they're doing something right, and we want to celebrate that. Our time to fill is well below market across the board. There's certainly, we're like everyone else, at times, like we do see times where we might have a longer time to fill for something, but our average is really great. We move really quickly. We can fill roles really quickly. And our offer acceptance rate is over 90%, and even when, the market was kind of at its peak I'd say maybe 3 years ago, we were still over 90% then. And I think it's been this evolution of, doing really great things from hiring, but this course and this training program that we've brought has really just made it even more successful and better. So all it's done is really spurred us on to look at other ways we can refine, hiring and interview excellence and what that means, and how we can bring even more kind of training and visibility into hiring.
There's so much correlation and overlap between all of the recruiting metrics. Like if you have a higher offer acceptance rate, your time to fill is just inherently going to be lower, because the person you want at the end is most likely going to accept. And there's a lot of companies, even in economic downturn, that have below average or below market offer acceptance rates, and their time to fill just skyrockets, because a lot of companies just put their eggs in that basket and they're like, hope this person accepts.
Yeah.
And then if they don't accept, you're kind of back, can be back to the start. So all of these things just kind of intertwine and work together. And I really loved one thing you said earlier about the experience for the hiring team. It's the same as the experience for the candidate. People are more engaged if they are enjoying the experience, and you need engaged hiring teams.
Yeah, we've actually put together a hiring manager survey as well, because we really wanted that feedback. We didn't want kind of like anecdotal stories here and there. So we've developed a hiring manager survey that goes out after kind of like every rec or every few recs, depending on the roles that we're working on for that manager. We want their candid feedback, because the same way we're looking at the hiring teams, about helping them upskill and evolve, we need to be mindful that we need to look at ourselves at times and say, hey, there's always opportunity for us to learn, and make sure that we're providing the best partnership that we can to the hiring teams, as well as making the experience engaging and valuable for them. Hiring can be a really heavy lift at times, especially when we're doing high growth roles and high number of roles like we are here at 1Password. So we want to make sure that it's not a grind, that it's something that they're excited to kind of work into their schedules and their time, because, we all know that they're working on some stuff to help drive the company forward, continue to drive our success. So we want to make sure that they see the correlation between successful hiring and successful growth of the business.
Yeah, 100%. I'm feeling really like this conversation has me feeling like really refreshed and hopeful for the future of talent. It's the one thing that I always think is like, let's just all remember that all of us that are a part of this process are human, and we have human feelings and human reactions, but the more positivity we can inject into this on both internally and for the candidates, it just makes everything so much better. And as a recruiter, you just feel so much more satisfied knowing that the person who accepted the offer had a great experience and is excited to start, or the person who didn't get to an offer would want to interview again, because a no today could be a yes tomorrow, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
So taking a big step back, and you mentioned the phrase hiring excellence. So you kind of teed it up there. At Ashby, we have a hiring excellence framework. We talk a lot about hiring excellence, but I'm always curious to hear from our guests, when you hear that phrase hiring excellence, like at the end of the day, what does that really mean to you?
So I really like this question because I think it's something that we don't think about enough at times, right? And we put into our talent OKRs this concept of interview excellence, and then kind of built out the projects that we thought it meant. And as we started to pull out the threads of what that meant, we realized what a big undertaking and how comprehensive it is, and all the components of interview excellence that maybe we hadn't necessarily thought of. So, ultimately it's about a fair and an equitable process, well-trained teams, engaging candidate experience. But I think there's a couple other themes that start to come out of it. It's not just how you interview, having well-trained teams, a seamless experience. It's how you evaluate, right? Fair and unbiased evaluations, looking at, the introduction of scorecarding into all of our roles for 2025 is something that we're going to be doing. Just the overall efficiency of how we hire. We're starting to introduce these hiring at scale programs at 1Password. So if you're looking at roles where we typically hire a lot of folks, so if it's our customer experience representatives, our business development representatives, we're starting to build out programs specific to them about really looking at, customizing their evaluation forms, their questions to be the same repeatable process every time, so that we're removing the bias, we can move more quickly, and that this helps us expedite these hires. So we rolled it out in a couple different groups at 1Password, and we're looking at building them out even more significantly for 2025. So I'm really excited to see how that plays out. The other things we've talked about around interview excellence is how we're incorporating our values into our interviews more consistently and asking questions that really resonate with us. And this goes from the entry level roles to our organization all the way up to the senior level roles. There's improvement everywhere that can be made all the time. So, I think it's something that it's all hands on deck when it comes to interview excellence. It needs to be something that everyone is truly bought into and sees the value and the ROI that's going to come from heavy investment into refining that.
Absolutely. And continuous improvement is such a big cornerstone of excellence. You cannot rest on your laurels. What worked even 6 months ago may not work today, and just constantly evaluating and evolving is so important. Last question. I feel like you've posted some moderately hot takes on LinkedIn. So I'm really excited to hear on this topic or a different topic. What is your recruiting hot take?
So I probably got a lot of hot takes, as you said. I think one that really jumps out to me right now is, and we joke about this internally, we're like, the robots are coming. I think we're really on the cusp of seeing how AI is really going to change how we do things. It might seem scary to folks, especially in talent, but the opportunity for efficiency is really intriguing. And I think it's something that we really have to explore cautiously and optimistically. So we're starting to explore tools now at 1Password across the people function, evaluating them from an efficiency, an experience, and, 1Password, certainly a security perspective. But it's time to really embrace how this could elevate talent acquisition and not think about how it's going to replace talent acquisition. And the other consideration I'd say is it really gives talent professionals an opportunity to diversify their skill sets. Like, this is coming. It's our opportunity to learn more about it, embrace it, become experts. And then as you build your portfolio, you can help companies drive adoption of these tools, down the road. So I'd say that's one thing that we're really starting to think about. And as I was starting to plan out 2025, it's certainly within, I'd say, the top of the list of the things that we're looking at.
For sure. My addition to that hot take is a hot take of my own, which is if you are a talent professional or honestly in any industry and you lean out from AI too far, I think you're going to be left behind. Yeah, like the cautious optimism, I think is a perfect way that you described it of let's do this thoughtfully, let's do it strategically, but we can't lean out because that's not really the right move either. One thing that we hear from a lot of our customers is just like all of these automations and AI features are saving them so much time. And it gets me really excited about what AI can do in that area because it's improving people's lives in that they're able to reduce their time doing things that really shouldn't require human touch right now. And then they can really focus on what does require human touch and hopefully be able to get back to their life outside of work sooner and without as much stress and pressure. So I'm with you. The AI stuff is definitely super interesting and I'm incredibly curious to hear about how it plays out, especially in the next year to 2 years in talent. But we are coming up on our time. Where should people go to learn more about you and 1Password?
So 1Password, you can go to 1Password.com. The site has a lot of great information about the product itself. We've got a lot of great action on social channels and platforms. I'm fairly active on LinkedIn. I love sharing hot takes or just asking questions. So it can always be connected with on LinkedIn, but 1Password.com certainly has everything for all the roles that we have as well.
Amazing. Well, Lyndsey, I can't thank you enough for joining us on Offer Accepted today. I think this is going to be super helpful information to teams looking to accelerate their candidate experience. So thank you again. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time. This episode was brought to you by Ashby. What an ATS should be. A scalable, all-in-one tool that combines powerful analytics with your ATS, scheduling, sourcing, and CRM. To never miss an episode, subscribe to our newsletter at www.ashbyhq.com/podcast. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.